This video is about compound meters. If you haven't watched the simple meter video, you really need to do that first and understand it fully before you go into compound. Now there is a third type of meter called complex. We are not getting into that right now. We're sticking to simple versus compound. If you have your chart, as my students should, to fill in, please make sure you have that in front of you and you're ready to go on the compound meters side. It is very similar to the simple meters, however, our time signatures have changed. And we're gonna approach this section differently because we're gonna start with the middle column where we input notes, not our beat unit column. And the reason for that is actually kind of weird. Beat units in compound meters are groups of three things. So your beat unit is actually going to be a dotted note. Every single time, a beat unit will be a dotted note because it is three things put together. So our beat division is going to be three things here. And they are equal things. So let's say, for example, I put 3/8 notes here. Those 3/8 notes would actually become a beamed group, and our dotted note of unit value would be a dotted quarter note. So we are dealing with groups of three. Now simple meter was all groups of two, so we would take a quarter note, we'd cut it in half, we'd cut it in half again. But in this case, it is three things. And that is why in our time signatures, every number on the top is a number divisible by 3 down to a lower common factor number. In our simple meters, our top numbers were 2, 3, and 4. Those only divide down into a 2 or a 1, and these ones all divide into 3. And the reason for that is you can't write a dotted quarter note as a beat unit on the bottom of a time signature. Now, I say can't, however, I have seen it done where they actually just drew a quarter note with a dot at the bottom of the time signature, but we're not gonna do that. We're gonna be very professional in the classical period. How did they write this out? So, instead of having a dotted quarter as our available number, which would be like, what, 4 plus 2? Wouldn't make any sense. We are going to use the number that corresponds to our beat division. All right, so one of the most commonly used compound meters that we see in music every day would be 6/8. So we're gonna start with our 6/8 column and get familiar with how this chart's going to work. So in our 6/8 column, we're gonna jump into our beat division box. Our beat division box is what is associated with the bottom number of our time signature. So in every time signature here, we have an 1/8 as our lower number of the time signature, which means there will be 3/8 notes in this box. Those 3/8 notes should be beamed together because we are talking about this as a beat unit. Now we're going to put in our counting system on top of that as well in just a moment, but we're going to add them up now. So what are 3/8 notes added up together? Well, we just did that over here. That is a dotted quarter note. So our beat unit is a dotted quarter note. Our beat division are 3/8 notes. When we get down to subdivision, we're going to cut all those 1/8 notes in half. And that means we go from 1 thing to 3 things to 6 things. So I'm going to start with my 6 notes. 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And I went from 1 beam as 8 notes to now 2 beams as 16th notes. All right, now my counting system, when I'm dealing with compound meter, is not to use these numbers on the top as our beat unit. That wouldn't make any sense. We do not have 6 of these beat units in a 6/8 measure. We actually have 6 of these beat divisions as our measure. So instead of saying that there are 6 eighth notes in a measure, count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we're going to count them in their beat units. So we would have a number and and this would be our number. So if you're dealing with a 6/8 measure, we'll put one right here, 6/8. We'll put some eighth notes in there. There we go. A 6/8 measure, you would want to see 6 eighth notes added up together to create that full measure, which means in this dotted quarter note are 3 eighth notes. That would be our 1, and then these are our next 3 eighth notes. That is our 2. Because our top number of our time signature 6, remember, can be divided by 3 for compound meter. 6 divided by 3 is 2. There are actually 2 beat units in the measure. So I can write 1 and 2, and then I need a beat division counting system. So my counting system is going to be an and followed by a. And that means in this dotted quarter note, I have a small and a small happening as well. All right, so when I go over here and I want to put this into our ridiculously small 16th note subdivision, we need to expand our counting system. So we know that the number is going to be here. There's something here. We have an and, something here, an and something here. Because these 2 eighth notes are going to be added up into this first, or sorry, 2 16th notes are going to be added into this eighth note. These second set of 2 sixth notes would be here, and this third set of 16th notes would be here on the Now there are no specific ways to count this, and sometimes it's honestly easier not to add a syllable when you're going very fast sight reading rhythms. I sometimes prefer not to put a syllable in there and just to double the speed of my hands clapping as I'm saying the and system. However, for the moment, we're just gonna put in a neutral syllable that we can choose. So if you want to choose something different from me, that is totally fine. Just please make sure that it does flow out of your mouth when you want to say it, and you're not tongue-tying yourself, and make sure you're not choosing anything that is already assigned to something else. For example, in simple meter, the letter E has already been assigned. You cannot use E in the middle of this, or you're going to count the rhythm in a very strange, simple meter way. So instead of that, I'm going to put the syllable T, T-I, as my placeholder. You can also just put an X. You could use Li or Lali. If you look in the back of your AP Barron book, there is an entire chart system that shows various people's philosophies on how to count in different syllable ways. So I'm just going to put T here for now, just a little TI every time, just as my placeholder. All right, so there's your 6/8, 9/8, and 12/8, which means if you're in 6/8, 6 divided by 3 is 2, so we would have 2 beat units in the measure. 9 divided by 3 is 3. There would be 3 of these boxes in a measure. 12 divided by 3 is 4. We would have 4 of these boxes in a measure. Same thing for either of these boxes because they do add up to 1 beat unit. Let's go to our 4. When we have a 4 as our lower number in the time signature on a compound meter, remember we're not going to start in our beat unit box because a quarter note is not our beat unit. We want something dotted, so we're going to figure out what that dotted note is. Right over here in beat division, we are going to plug in 3 quarter notes. Always 3 things in this column. And that's going to have our number and Now if I add up those 3 quarter notes, I get a dotted half note. That dotted half note is my beat unit number. And I can divide them down for my subdivision into 6 things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And I'm going to beam them together because I went from a quarter note to an eighth note. Therefore, I now have 6 eighth notes as 1 beat in the subdivided fashion. So here's my and, my if I skip every other one, I can put T, T, and T. Okay? I'm gonna go down to 16th notes, which are gonna have a lot of beams. 16th notes, once again, start in your beat division box. Let's put 3 16th notes in here. 1, 2, 3. We're gonna give them 2 beams. Keep them beamed together because they are a beat unit. And this becomes number and okay. We're gonna add those 3 16th notes up. That becomes a dotted 8th note. And that is our beat unit, the dotted 8th note for all the 16th at the bottom time signatures. When we get into our subdivision, we're gonna go from 3 things to 6 things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Beam it once for 8th notes, twice for 16th notes, and 3 times for 32nd notes. And that becomes number, T, and T, T. So if you were saying these counts really fast, it would be 1 T and T, a T, 2 T and T, a T, 3 T and T, a T, which obviously can be a lot. But like I said, if you want to choose a different syllable, you're more than welcome to do so. All right, let's go up to our 2s on the bottom of our time signature. For beat division, that means we're going to be having a half note in here. So we need 3 half notes. Here's our number, our and our We're gonna add those 3 half notes together and get a dotted whole note. So there is our number. We're gonna split those half notes in half again and end up with 6 quarter notes. 4, 5, and 6. So we've got number, T, and T, T. All right, and lastly, with whole note on the bottom of our time signature, it's gonna get kind of funky. So our beat division is 3 whole notes. That's ugly. Here's our number, our and our And when we add those whole notes up together, what you're gonna use is this little Oreo cookie version of a whole note, which means 2 whole notes together. And you're gonna put a dot on it, which adds the 3rd whole note. This is our number. And our beat subdivision, we're gonna cut a whole note in half and get 6 half notes. 4, 5, and 6. Number, T, and T, T. So if I was looking at one of these ridiculous time signatures, let's say 12-1, that would mean there are 12 of these in a measure, which means there are 12 sets of these in a measure and 12 sets of these in a measure. I mean, why even write the piece? Nobody's gonna read that, that's horrible. So really think about what time signature you want to use. The same rules apply when you're transposing from one meter to another meter. You must obey the columns. So if I'm saying I have a 12/8 piece and I want to put it into 12/2, that means that everything that was a dotted quarter note is now becoming a dotted half note. If I have 8th notes, they're becoming half notes. If I have 16th notes, they're becoming quarter notes. So you want to use this chart to make sure you're staying on track with what equals what. It doesn't change the speed. Once again, it only changes the look, which is why I'm saying nobody would want to read this. We'd much rather read something down here in these areas. And nobody would want to read this. They would want to read something more like this. So depending on how much you're dividing or subdividing, you want to choose an appropriate meter for your piece. So that is compound meter. Always make sure that you are looking at this and dividing your top number by 3 and getting your beat division, and that your bottom number is the type for that division. All right.